Hey, this is Christian Anschuetz. You've seen me before. I am back at you here talking Task Force Tribute and Project RELO. I often do the leadership and Cloud Wars discussions, and I'm doing something a little bit different now. And maybe you saw the first episode. I hope you saw the first episode. It is truly my pleasure. And I don't just say that, even though that's kind of like a, a way we talk, when we're introducing somebody. I want to really introduce somebody that is truly my pleasure to have here. This gentleman on the screen, this handsome young gentleman here, is his name is Cole Kingseed. You can see that in the lower left-hand corner, but he's more than just Cole Kingseed. He's a whole lot more. He's got a bio about a mile long, and I'm going to just introduce him here, and I'm going to hit the highlights. Cole, if you give me a second here, just let me go through some of this. Cole, first and foremost, before I even get into this, is Cole is a good friend of mine. I've known him for many years, and I've had many a shared experience with him that has been absolutely fantastic and in some ways profoundly life impacting. You're going to learn more about that. But until I get into that, let me read some. Colonel Cole C. Kingseed. What a cool name, Cole Kingseed. Colonel Cole Kingseed is a retired Army officer, 30-year Army veteran who commanded at the platoon, the company, and the battalion levels. During his career, he served in the infantry in a variety of assignments, which with that many years, you were bound to have many different assignments. And he culminated his tenure in the military as a full professor of history and chief of military history at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. He holds a PhD from the Ohio State University. I have to say the now, right? Because that is trademark. He holds a PhD from the OSU and a master's in national security and strategic studies from the U.S. Naval War College. That's pretty cool, too. He is the author of Eisenhower and the Suez Crisis of 1956, the American Civil War from Omaha Beach to Dawson's Ridge, and a number of different ones. I could go down this list, but he also did Beyond the Band of Brothers. Regardless, and I could go on through all this lengthy set of introductions here. We're sitting in the presence of someone that knows the value of a good story, has lived a storied life, and knows and understands the value of stories, and actually has told them to great effect in any number of these books that I went through, and I didn't even hit them all. I'm going to stop there and just say the only other way I would introduce Colonel Cole. Cole, welcome to this discussion, and thanks for being here.
Well, it's great seeing you again, Christian, always.
It is
wonderful to talk about veterans.
It is, and thank you for being here.
Well, you know what? We always take a look at the World War II generation as the greatest generation. But I tried to inspire to the cadets at the United States Military Academy, those women and men, your legacy ought to be, that was the greatest generation of the 21st century. You know what? The World War II generation, the Civil War generation, the generation that on the global war and terrorism, they're the exact same women and men who have served. Their sacrifices are identical, and that's we sometimes forget about that. I know there are a lot of bad things going on with our country, but there's always been that. But it seems to me that in times of great turmoil and crisis, the men and women who have served and are serving in uniform, they're a special breed because they don't do it for themselves. It's not a job. It's an obligation to improve the world and improve this country. And they will do it. They will share the last drop in their canteens, the last ration that they will have with their buddies. They're the exact same. So I'm always very optimistic on the future of the generation that serves. You know what? We go through is peaks and valleys, is it not? Even prior to World War II, very isolationist, very non-interventionist, and yet somehow 16 million men and women served. We did the same thing after the Vietnam War. Sometimes we just don't tell, as you say, the right stories. Good example of that. You can go to every national news. Doesn't make any difference what they okay. They're all the bad stories. Generally, it's the last 2 minutes in every news segment where it might be their highlight, an unsung hero. Why can't we just? It'll never be a balance. I get all that because everybody, there's sensationalism. I clearly understand that, but we have to do a much better job on the better stories and highlight some of these. Even some of these, the president of the United States, he's recently bestowed the Medal of Honor on a number of servicemen and all that. You take a look at national news, it's like probably like a 50-second segment on that, and it's lost. That's why we have to end up doing telling the stories and be much more proactive on that, because those are the stories that inspire America.
Agreed, and that's why I to your point, proactive. I think deliberate, and that's what we've been trying to do is activate people to not just share their stories, but then be censors and collect others, and they tell two friends and tell two friends. And by the way, there's been organizations doing this for ages, right? We've got the Story Corps from NPR, the Smithsonian's done it, museums all over, the national museums all over the country have done it, and yet the stories are kind of lost in this, as you said. It's 12th page news, if you will. If I could, I'd like to share something with you, Cole. A couple stories, interactions. Let me rephrase: interactions of people that I met on this 22-day journey through the heart and soul of America as part of Task Force Tribute. And the first one was a woman that I met, and it's a Gold Star mother, and she would have given anything for stories about her son. You see, her son was an Air Force pilot. And as an Air Force pilot, he was flying a U-28 reconnaissance vehicle, aircraft, that is. And that is a top secret mission. Most times, if it's not training, it's top secret. And it went down in global war on terror, where? Djibouti, Africa. That's all she knows. She doesn't know what happened. She doesn't know how her boy died. She doesn't know how the 3 crewmen that were with him died. And she lost her only son. And I'm talking to this woman, and she's sharing this with me. And she's affected by this. And it occurred to me, this woman who was looking for just any kind of information and sharing her desire to have any kind of information. She had every reason to not care for this country. Now, the red, white, and blue behind me could have just been an insult to her for taking her son, but she was bedecked in red, white, and blue. She was probably wearing a gold star, even though it's not a badge of honor. It's a sign of loss. And this woman was stalwartly, proud to be an American, even in the face of such a loss. And I share that because stories would have been invaluable to her. And if we could collect those from the people that knew her son, well, then let me segue into one other. And so it was not too long after that, I ran into the mother and father of a soldier that was killed about a decade ago. And Cole, when that I'd never heard of this, but when the son was killed, the unit, everybody in his company wrote a letter to the parents. And they wrote a letter and they said, this is how we knew your son, and this is how I met him. This is something funny he said or did. This is something I learned from him. And when they got the letters after his death, they couldn't help it. They were just opening them up and they were reading them. But they paused. And then the father was a Marine Corps veteran himself, but they paused and they said, wait, let's do something different. And they took about half of the letters that they hadn't gone through, and they kind of, what he said, held them in reserve. And now every once in a while, when they feel a certain way, they open up one of those letters and they read a story about their son. And in their words, it breathes life back into their son. Their son comes back to life through the mind and the words of a former company mate, a comrade in arms, and they're back alive. And so there's healing involved in these stories. There's honor, there's remembrance, there's inspiration. I think there's a lot of reasons to capture these stories.
Oh, I think so too. Can I show you another book that's inspired me? And it kind of goes back to, let me just reach over. We talked about Hal Moore. In recent months, I know that you're familiar with this, that the Department of Defense has certainly made a concerted effort to rename a lot of the military bases, certainly in the Army. They're named after Confederate. That's very controversial in some case and all that. I'm an infantryman. I grew up. I thought that Fort Benning, Georgia was the center of the universe. Well,
I was just there.
That's from the Army perspective, and I get all that. But it was but the naming commission has recommended that Fort Benning, Georgia, to be renamed Fort Moore.
Oh, really?
This is even greater. This is even more important. It's to honor not only Lieutenant General Harold G. Moore, but his wife, Julie Compton Moore. Because if you watch the movie, We Were Soldiers, then Lieutenant Colonel Moore commanded the 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, and the first pitch battle between the United States Army and the People's Army of Vietnam in November of 1965. While Colonel Moore was fighting, in those days, the death notices were delivered by taxi drivers around Columbus, Georgia. And Mrs. Moore, the colonel's wife, took it upon herself, henceforth, she called the company, bring all those notices to me. And it really forced the Army to rethink how this notification process. So General Moore wrote 2 books. One was called We Were Soldiers Once, and then a decade later, he wrote this one. It was called We Are Soldiers Still. And his last chapter highlights 2 people, 2 heroes of America. One was a man by the name of Rick Riscala, who happened to be one of the company commanders in the Audrain Valleys. And what Riscala did after he retired, I believe he was working with Merrill Lynch, and he anticipated problems in the World Trade Center, and he did a number of these evacuation drills, got every one of his people out, and then he went back into the Twin Towers to make sure everybody else was out when the Twin Tower collapsed. So that was one of them. But General Moore talked about his wife, Julie Compton Moore, and she was a daughter of an Army colonel. Her husband had served in the United States Army, General Moore, 32 years, and they had several sons who were West Point graduates. And one of those sons was fighting in the global war against terrorism. And Moore's co-author, Joe Galloway, said, "Well, you shouldn't be concerned about that, because you're kind of an Army brat. Your husband served and all that, and so I'm sure you're used to the military and your son down there." And Julie Compton Moore said, "Joe, you don't know anything. It has nothing to do. You can replace a father. You can replace a husband. You cannot replace a son or a daughter, because that is perhaps one of the cruelest losses. I can imagine if one of my son or my daughters would be on that. So everybody makes the sacrifices, but that's when it really hits home. And that's exactly what you're talking about, that when they reread these letters about their sons or their daughters, what they meant to their fellow soldiers or Marines and all that. That's why those stories must be told and retold.
And retold and told, by the way, in different perspectives, because that's often a thing that gets lost, is that we only hear the perspective of one person. And they and so again, kind of to Buck Compton's point, there were so many other stories that needed to be told, so many other perspectives of people doing amazing things. I can definitely attest to something you were saying. My brother was killed while serving in the Army, and of course that affected siblings too. But what I saw it do to my parents, it was they might as well have had, like, to some extent, what was the very best of them excised from their body and their soul. It was something that they never ever got over. It's just they made room for in their lives to continue to live somehow. But it was a loss. It was a real loss, and yet they never abandoned the faith and the commitment and that in the country in which that my brother served, because while his loss was tragic, and they would be the first ones to tell you that, they were still proud of him for having donned the uniform in the first place.
Yeah. And you know what? By telling those stories, I can never imagine the loss, nor can I imagine the loss of your brother. But every time I see that, all I can think of is it's really an impetus to share those stories, to make sure that they will never be forgotten. Always goes back to the same thing that Lincoln mentioned at Gettysburg on that November 19, 1863, when he talks about the world will little note or long remember what we say here, but we can never forget what they did here.
No, and we got to hope that there are lessons in the stories too, to help us avoid some of the mistakes that got those service men and women into those positions in the first place. Because in the end, perhaps serving your country is great and noble, and it's certainly not for everybody. And then, by the way, there's all sorts of ways. I think you and I and hopefully everybody listening would understand there's lots of ways to serve the country that have nothing to do with the military. And I don't believe, and Cole, I'm going to put words in your mouth, I don't think you believe that veterans are better than non-veterans at all. It's just that the veterans have a unique sort of experience set in many cases, especially those that serve during times of conflict.
Yeah, it is true. Again, you don't even have to be in uniform. Police, firemen, military, teachers, serve.
I would say teachers.
It is a noble profession.
Absolutely.
What brings everybody together, it's really is the selfless service. This is not about yourself. Sometimes it takes us a long time. It's certainly been in my case. You focus more on your individual advancement, your rank, and all this kind of stuff. On reflection, and a lot of that comes I get with age and experience. I'm 73 years old right now. My greatest joy in my life right now is to see the younger generations, my children and my children's children, as well as my wife Mary, enjoy the fruits of liberty. And again, it's not just based on what I did by any means, but it's the hundreds and thousands and the tens of millions, the welfare of the community, the country, foremost in their minds. that's you can't describe it on that. I end up saying, and I've seen it so many times around New York, and just particularly after the 20th anniversary of 9/11, our local communities was hit hard with the loss of a lot of firemen and police, because this is kind of a bedroom community around New York City, where I live in Cornwall on Hudson. And now, 21 years later, of course, you still have so many of these folks that are passing based on the effects of 9/11. And my heart breaks. I shed a tear, in my case here, tears of joy when I see these wonderful pictures of young kids playing, baseball, and unbeknownst to them, their father or their mother is hiding there, or it might be umpiring a game, and they call the young kid out, and they make him strike out, and the kid's kind of looking back like that, and then is getting ready to yell at the umpire, and then the umpire takes off her mask, and it's his mother who is coming back from the service, and the great joy to be able to see, returning servicemen or a teacher, that haven't been around. I cry like a baby, and I'm not, not ashamed to admit it.
It's a funny thing. A lot of folks don't actually know military veterans, and they know us from the movies, and the movies are very one-dimensional. Again, military veterans aren't better than non-veterans, and just like all of us, we all laugh, cry, bleed, find joy, and sometimes bounce into misery. And it's the human condition, the same for all of us. Hey, we're going to get close to wrapping up here. Is there a story that you would like to share that is a profound story that someone told you about their service, that you would that inspires you about something they did or something they saw, something you'd like to share with us right now?
I always go back to Dick Winters. Again, Dick Winters was old enough to be my father, and I probably spent more time with Major Winters of Band of Brothers, and of course he was the central figure on the mini series. And I always the question the last question when I would interview these veterans on, how would you like to be remembered? It's always the last question. And the responses to that always gets me right in the heart. I'm gonna give you a couple examples of that. For Major Winters, he goes, want to be remembered as the commander of Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 101st Airborne Division. Bud Lomel, who destroyed the guns at Pointe du Hoc. How would you like to be remembered? I'd like to be remembered as a Ranger. He was a Ranger to the day that he died. He married his wife after the war. It had to be on June 6th, the anniversary of D-Day. General Gavin wanted to be remembered as a paratrooper. Joe Dawson at Omaha Beach. I asked him how he wanted. I wanted to be remembered as commander of Company G, 2nd Battalion of the 16th Infantry Regiment. But what struck me on all that, and it's the same thing with Hal Moore. How would you like to be remembered? So I would always like to be remembered as a soldier. And that's why he called his book, We Were Soldiers Once and Young. So my point, Christian, is they never focus on themselves. They are always focusing on the unit, the men and women with whom they had the honor to serve. I told Dick, both Dick and his wife asked me probably about a year before Major Winters passed in 2011. They asked me to be the MC of his memorial service, which I was honored to do. And I asked Dick one time. It was the very last words I gave to him. I knew that he was dying, and I'd asked my wife Mary. I said, "Try to get Mrs. Winters out of the room just for a minute, because I want something to tell Dick Winters." And Mary was able to do that, and I got very close to Dick. He was confined to a chair, and I just looked at him, and I know that I had a tear in my eye. I said, "Dick, the country was blessed to have had you in its hour of need. I love you as my brother." And with tears in his eye, Christian, he just looked at me and said, "Cole, don't ever change." I guess that's how I would kind of impart. And because he knew that I was able to help him tell his story. And that's our challenge, to be able to tell, and not just to interview the veterans, but to share those stories. And it can be in any form that you desire, but it's a moral obligation for us to do so.
Well, Cole, you're a gentleman, an officer, retired, a scholar, an author, a businessman, and a family member, a father, a grandfather, a husband. You're many things. How would you like to be remembered?
You know what? It's interesting for me. I like to be remembered that I made an effort to make my world, a small corner of my world, better for me having lived.
Well, folks, if there wasn't a great way to end in terms of an inspirational, sort of message for us all to kind of digest, maybe that's what Cole here how he'd like to be remembered. Yet it might be a challenge for us all to think about, and maybe even rise to, that our existence here hasn't been just about ourselves, but our existence on this planet is also about doing something more for our families, our community. It might be just a small fraction, a small corner of the world. Yet if we can just improve that a little bit, and we all did that, guess what? We'll find the generations that think like that. Well, those will in fact be the greatest generations. Everybody, thank you so much, Cole. Such a pleasure. I love the interaction. Thank you for sharing all these different stories and perspectives. Thanks for talking. I can't thank you enough, and I really appreciate you being here.
Christian, it's always an honor and a pleasure to see you. It's the friendship, honor, commitment is the hallmark of our friendship, and I appreciate everything you have done, and particularly for what you have done to make this world a better place and to honor our veterans. Take care, my friend.
You as well. And everybody, take care, be well, be safe, and we'll hopefully see you all soon. Thank you.